Life is like a mirror. Smile at it and it smiles back at you. Laughing is the best medicine. Indeed, it mitigates the drop of the immunity that occurs when we are under stress. And moreover, at a social level, it banishes inhibitions and allows the real emotions to come to light. But what makes us laugh? What is humor? To find a specific and unique way to define humor is really an hard work. Philosophers, writers, linguists have tried with lots of obstacles to define the concept of humor, tracing the leading features and suggesting lots of theories. According to famous French philosopher Henri Bergson, there is nothing comic outside its really humor. A landscape could be beautiful, lovely, never ridiculous. The comedy is seen as a play that imitates life. Any actions or event which are connected to each other that give the illusion of life and the sensation of a mechanical order can be defined as funny. Differently, Luigi Pirandello analyzes instead comic and humor concepts, defining the last one as contrary feeling. Humor's attitude belongs to who, detecting those shades, discovers the pain that is hidden behind this attitude. While according to the famous Austrian psychoanalyst Sigmund Freud, the man laughing frees himself from inhibitions. It temporarily hushes up the censorship and offers a relief valve to the aggressiveness. Therefore, humor can be defined as the faculty, the ability, and the fact of perceiving, expressing, and representing the most curious, incongruent, and the funniest aspects of reality which can provoke laugh or smile. Humor is what makes someone laugh, but can be situations in which people laugh and someone claims it's not funny. This is one of the biggest obstacles for humor comprehension among people having different origins with a different culture and educational background, but also and especially because they speak different languages, and this makes difficult the comprehension of humor because of the main obstacle of translating a joke into another language, as it has different expressions, syntaxes, and figure of speech. This quote by Virginia Woolf sums up in only one sentence the content and the purpose of such study. Humor is the first quality which disappears in a foreign language. Being an analysis on global laughing and humor in translation, it's important to detect that the translation process is as fascinating as programmatic art. The difficulties linked to translation come from a series of factors and aspects which are not only linked to the translation field, but also embrace cultural matters. There are also terms which have cultural references and difficult to translate that are so connected to geographical and cultural reality that they will lose their sense and value beyond such reality. This becomes worse when to all of these are added also humorous expressions. Here is an example of what I'm talking about. A not native Spanish person could think that this cartoon is representing a lottery victory. On the other hand, the Spanish will recognize first of all that the subjects of this graphic representation are the then Spanish First Minister Zapatero and Spanish opposition leader Rajoy, and maybe it will think that this latter has finally won the election with 4 million votes. Actually, none of these interpretations are right, because this cartoon is referring to the 4 Spanish unemployed. For this reason, the First Minister Zapatero is despairing because he will have to take the lead on this problem. Here is explained how the social-cultural contents of this cartoon can be misunderstood among people having different competencies and erroneously interpreted in a context which is different from the original one. Beyond the limits related to humor due to the culture and linguistic meaning of that notion, there are other obstacles which are proper of the language itself. For example, the internationalisms, words of common derivation with similar form and meaning, existing in different national languages. German international words are Motor, Machine, Yet, and Geography, while examples of English internationalisms are the words jeans, t-shirt, and tea, as well as the false trends. They are similar in their form, but have different meaning, as for example, the German word firma, whose real meaning is company, but can be confused in Italian with the word signature. Or for example, the English parent, that in Italian can be misunderstood and linked with the word relative. Again, also a way of saying proper of the language can be found. They must be not translated literally, because behind the words is hidden a complete different meaning. A literal translation so would be considered as unfaithful because it ignores the general sense of the sentence. We are talking about the English idiomatic expression, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Who will be that translator who will translate the expression literally, since its general sense is everything you own is beautiful according to yourself. Or again, an example of the German language is Er hat nicht alle Tassen im Schrank, which should not be translated as he has not all the cat in the cupboard, but rather with being mad. The typical way in which humor becomes alive in all its forms, in all the languages and cultures of the world, is doubtless represented by the joke. We all have in our brain a cognitive model, a mental structure which is the synthesis of past experiences. When the information coming are dissimilar to the model, we feel an incongruity. When we listen to a joke, our brain elaborates the information, distinguishing between two phases. In the first phase, we detect the situation with the first part denied from the last part, and we perceive the incongruity, while in the second phase, we put to use a mechanism aimed to give sense to the conclusion, reconciling the incongruous parts. The first author who talked about incongruity connected to laugh was Schopenhauer. The reason why we laugh anyway is simply the sudden perception of incongruity between a concept and the real objects that have been thought from its base. The laugh itself is the expression of this incongruity. At the beginning of the 7th century, many scholars engaged to clarify the mental processes involved in decoding a humorous impulse. The researches produced were named as the incongruity resolution model. The subject running into a humorous text perceives an incongruity that commits him in a problem solving, which allows him to trace the cognitive role to resolve the incoherence. The appreciation of humor occurs if there is an intermediate difficulty level of problem solving, while humor can be considered obvious if there is a low difficulty level, or at the contrary, there is no appreciation and immediate comprehension of humor if there is an high difficulty level. Talking about intercultural humor, it's necessary to claim that in order to understand humor, an interlocutor should know, besides the grammar structures of a language, also the socio-cultural ones implied in the humorous text. Emanuele Banfi correctly asserts that what in London and Athens people laugh at, not necessarily has the same effect in Paris or Milan. Nevertheless, it's due to observe that there exist also comical characters which are able to cross these intercultural boundaries. The first important example to mention is doubtless Charlie Chaplin, famous British actor, producer, screenwriter, comedian and composer. The character that gave him his world-famous success was that of a vagabond. His distinguishing peculiarity was especially his clipped moustache and undulating walk. Another important example, always coming from the British humor, is Mr. Bean. He lives alone, always wears a formal dress, drives an economy car, and has a teddy bear as his best friend. Now it's time to join Humor in Translation, analyzing how the different kinds of humor can be classified, simply outlining what is important from the translator point of view, and examining elements as the target. Victims can be people, individuals, or groups. Differences between source and translation tend to involve some combination of different people in different places at different times. For example, if the source text has taken its readers as the victims, we need to ask how is this going to work when the readers are no longer the same. A significant example of what is being said is that British humor simply may not travel abroad. In other countries, people laugh at the British. The British do not poke fun at their own failings. These themes change from a continent to the other because the jokes tell the story of a country, its traditions, its weaknesses, and its lifestyle. In Albania and in Romania, in dictatorship's time, people laughed at dictators, but only in their homes to feel free. In Russia, for example, the main theme of many puns is the vodka. Even in Morocco, comedians deal with themes considered as taboo, such as sex and religion. A Muslim discovers to be gay, thus he decides to wear the headscarf. The meaning is an additional difficulty since it often relies on double meaning, ambiguity, and metaphorical meanings. Therefore, metalinguistic humor is that humor which has as object the language itself. Obviously, translation is nearly always about changing from one language into another, and that tends to pose serious difficulties for finding a way to translate these jokes. We could almost say that translation itself is a word game, and rendering metalinguistic humor in another language is always a particularly challenging riddle. It's even possible to claim that the translation of humor can be compared with the translation of a poem. The likely presence of irony and other potentially confusing signals means that the translator needs to strive to discriminate whether an instance of humor is attacking or serving certain aspects of a given society or community. Finally, humor is a powerful tool for criticizing something or someone. Now it's time to give free play to humor. I quote three typical examples of the Italian, British, and German humor. Therefore, starting from the Italian language, it will be difficult to translate this joke based on the ambiguity hidden behind the words themselves. Serious car accident, lose the right arm. The police is investigating about the left one or the accident. As well as the English joke. What is the longest word in the English language? Smiles, because there is a mile between its first and last letters. And in the end, can't be missed an example coming from the German humor. Death of the tree is, if you will, the most difficult to translate. A man enters a pharmacy and asks, "Can I have a package of acetyl salicylic?" The pharmacist, "You mean an aspirin?" The man, "Yes, of course. I can never remember that stupid word." In conclusion, from the overall pen, it's possible to realize how humor is strictly linked to typical aspects of a given society, and so it is obviously barely definable within univocal standards because of its close dependence to likewise characteristic variables. It's still necessary to clarify which are those factors able to produce empathy, namely the capacity to recognize the emotional states of other people. This concept can be recapped as to put oneself in someone else's shoes, but its real meaning is instead not only to go toward the other, but also bring him into our world. The cognitive empathy, that is, understanding active cognitive models in a given time of a given culture, the beliefs, the values, the ideologies, and the mental structures that the culturally different subject own, is the key to understand humor beyond geographical boundaries.